Hello everyone, this is Professor Richard Lynch. We're going to explore the implications of a potential major change in the world strategic economic environment. It's one that will impact on many companies, both large and small. What does the 2024 United States election of President Trump mean for international and global business strategy? The International Monetary Fund has already said that Mr. Trump's proposal to impose new taxes on goods imported to the USA will reduce world gross domestic product by a massive 7 percentage points. But the new president has taken a different view on this. He regards tariffs as the most beautiful word in the dictionary. He argues that tariffs, a tax imposed on goods entering the USA, are a central part of his new American economic strategy. He says that they are a way of growing the US economy, protecting the jobs and reducing taxes for all Americans. Now, our purpose in this presentation is not to examine in depth whether this strategy is correct. We will assume that there are new tariffs. Our focus is on the implications for global business strategy. Importantly, these matters need to be set in the broader context of the general business strategies of every company that is trading internationally. These are explored in more depth in Chapter 19 of our book on strategic management. The focus of this presentation is much narrower. It is on the tariff impact of the Trump victory for companies outside the USA. We're going to look at this under three main headings. First, we'll set the strategic context by looking at the existing international and global strategies of companies. Second, we'll take a broader look at tariffs and other trade barriers for large and smaller companies. And finally, we'll look at strategies for coping with the tariffs and other trade barriers. Well, we start with the larger companies that are trading globally. They are particularly important because they contribute most to world trade. Many import their goods into the USA, for example, the large crude oil companies like Saudi Arabian Oil, Shell and ExxonMobil. Then there are the car companies like Toyota and Mercedes-Benz, and so on. All these major importers will be hit by the new US import tariffs. Tariffs put a tax on their import prices of between 10 and 20%. They make them less competitive compared to American manufactured goods inside the USA. But tariffs are not applied equally on all goods and services. Some may be higher than others. For example, there may be no tariff at all on some services like financial dealing. Moreover, the USA is not the only source of business profits for many large companies. Other regions of the world may be more important than the USA, and this will impact on the strategies of large companies. Finally, and from a strategy negotiation perspective, all these large global companies have strong personal contacts with their home governments. For example, Saudi Arabian Oil with the leaders of that country, Volkswagen with Germany, Huawei with China, and so on. In responding to new Trump tariffs, large companies therefore need to persuade their home governments to act, as well as dealing directly with the US tariff authorities. Many large global companies, often called MNEs in strategic management, will want to rethink their global strategies in the context of the new Trump policies. Globalization strategies typically involve sourcing different parts of a product in several countries and then assembling the final product in other countries. The choice of country depends on several complex factors, including the labour costs in a particular country, the natural resources of that country, and the necessary technical skills in that country. For example, mobile phone companies like Apple and Samsung have multiple sources of production, assembly, technical development, and of course sales. They often organise their financial accounts to take their profits in the country with the lowest taxes, even if this means that it's not their home country. Hence, the final Trump tariff tax on a product imported into the USA may only be a small part of a much more complex cost and profit structure for many companies. So, how have global strategies impacted on world trade? World trade has been growing steadily for over 50 years because, broadly speaking, free trade has been found to be beneficial to many countries and companies. And lower tariffs, especially through the legal policing of the World Trade Organization, has been a major contributor to this. But tariffs may only be a small part of the strategic opportunities and problems of particular industries. 3 examples make this point. Chinese electrical vehicles now pose a threat to Western car manufacture. Food and beverage companies make their products in many countries, so already operate inside tariff walls. And television, film, and online media are already global. Now, let's look at tariff barrier strategies. Although Mr. Trump has named tariff as his primary focus, he could also raise other barriers to trade. For example, he can put an absolute numerical limit on the number of goods to be imported, and this is called a quota. There are plenty of other more obscure barriers under the general heading of NTBs that will effectively limit imports. These and other areas have been used by countries in the past to restrict imports. Many of these barriers are against the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs 1948 as policed by the World Trade Organization. But President Trump will almost certainly ignore this legal treaty signed by the USA amongst many other countries. Hence, it will be important to identify precisely what tariff barriers Mr. Trump will apply. Here are some of the classic ways that both large and smaller companies can cope with higher tariffs. First, it's important to clarify how a 10 or 20% increase in tariffs for imports into the USA will work. Is it just 10%? Is it a numerical reduction on the number of goods called a quota? What other barriers might be erected? Having clearly established the tariff, it may then be possible to identify some strategies that will work around this, perhaps by stripping down the product, perhaps refining the product under a different classification, perhaps taking the CKD route, perhaps relocating manufacture inside the USA, though this usually takes time, perhaps even negotiating through an agreement at government level. But these are just options. The chosen strategy will depend on the individual company. Given that 10 to 20% tariffs will be applied by America on all imports from early 2025, what can companies do? Well, they can focus on other regional markets and free trade areas like the European Union and Mercosur. They may be able to engage in bartering, called counter-trade, with American companies, but this is likely to have limited scope, quite frankly. They may be able to provide services like consultancy advice that are not subject to tariff. And they may perhaps work through free trade zones that defer tariffs. Perhaps some American states will set these up. The important point is that foreign governments and the World Trade Organization will also have a direct impact on the tariff strategies of individual companies. Finally, President Trump's policy of isolating America from world trade will not only work through tariffs. He has proposed a series of tax cuts and structural changes across the country. He controls both houses of Congress, so these are highly likely to be enacted. They will lead to higher price inflation in the USA and to problems over the value of the US dollar in international markets. In turn, this will lead to uncertainty and impact on the value of the US dollar on world markets. Equally, foreign governments won't just stand idle. They will respond with their own tariff and other barriers. Companies need to make their best estimates of all this in developing their strategies. But this will be difficult in an environment that one well-respected economic commentator has called chaotic. The 4 years from 2025 will be very difficult, and not just for tariffs. There's a Chinese proverb that says, "Know yourself, know your enemy, and you will never be defeated in 100 battles." Companies are much more likely to win tariff battles if they have fully developed their strategies for international development. And Chapter 19 sets out the main factors. But this is not enough. Companies need to undertake a much broader analysis to identify their strengths and weaknesses, their leadership and culture, and their innovative capabilities. And that's where our book on strategic management can also assist. Thank you for watching this presentation.